Yeah, I just wanted to say there is an elephant in the room that we are not addressing. Yeah, I feel there is a disconnect here between the digital migrants like you and me and the digital natives there. The question that you asked, history beyond textbooks, I don't know whether I say it right, but history beyond textbooks has to be hyperlinked, which means what? I'll take one more minute. Which means what? That if I'm doing partition, if I'm reading partition, then I need a hyperlink that goes to the Museum of Material History. I need, if I'm doing partition, I'm going to need a hyperlink to the People's Linguistic Survey of India. I need a hyperlink which tells me gives me clips to documentaries and archives. We are addressing a bunch of kids here who are looking at multimedia formats, right? And beyond textbooks is actually to give them what they want. It is precisely to make history not historical, but to turn it into a multimedia format.
Absolutely.
Just one more point. We're looking, it's a speculation, I'm no crystal ball gazer, but I think in the next 50 years, what's going to happen is that the entire cultural history has to be turned into a digitized form. So coming back to the question, what do I do when I study history? Well, you study digital archiving, for example. You get the media tools and the apps, the digital apps, which turn history into digital humanities, and the future is yours.
VLF 2024 and the last session for today. A very interesting panel discussion on history beyond textbooks. And our moderator is Mr. Sachin Jagidar. But before I introduce our moderator and the authors, we have a very interesting AV for you. So let's have a look at the AV.
Welcome, esteemed audience, to our enthralling discussion on history beyond textbook. Joining us are distinguished panelists, each bringing a unique perspective to the rich tapestry of India's past. First, we have John Zuberzicki, a Sydney-based author and researcher illuminating South Asia's contemporary history, with his captivating storytelling and in-depth research. Next, Swapna L., an ardent lover of Delhi, focuses on its cultural and intellectual life in the 19th century, advocating for the preservation of historic precincts through her work with Intagh. Anchal Malhotra, an oral historian and writer, explores family histories and social ethnography through the Museum of Material Memory, delving into the profound impact of the 1947 partition. Devika Sethi, a professor at IIT Mandi, delves into modern Indian history with books like War Over Words and Banned and Censored, offering insights into India's journey to freedom. Guiding our exploration is our esteemed moderator, Sachin Jahangirdar, founding member, current General Secretary and the force behind Vidarbha Literary Festival. Get ready for a journey through time as we unravel the layers of history with our insightful panel.
So that was AI and making our jobs easier as always. So may I request Mr. Sachin Jagirdar to escort all the authors.
Thank you. This is AI generated, and this is generated by my friend Rama. His two sons, they're twins, 9-year-olds. They run this company called Inverse AI, and they recently met Narendra Modi ji very closely, and they are working on something. They're building something on AI, very closely working with the PMO. So on 22nd Jan, Rama with his two sons were at the PMO while the nation was celebrating Ram Temple. So this topic today, history beyond textbooks, actually is kind of a selfish topic. I have always been wondering that what leads people to read and write beyond the textbooks. And this I'll share with my own journey. I mean, for example, I remember there was one 25 years ago, I think 25 years ago, there was one issue of India Today, wherein there was a cover page had the photograph of Savarkar. And that was a controversy when one of the Congress leaders said that the RSS should apologize on behalf of Savarkar. And 25 years ago, I had no clue what they were saying or what they were meaning. And that is the time when I started reading taking a deep dive into various authors, various articles and various books. Starting from my textbooks, I started actually from the textbooks, and then I ventured into certain other writings. And then it kind of जैसे कोहरा हटता है ना, वैसे मेरे आंखों के सामने से कोहरा हटता गया. And it's now 25 years and I've been reading various sources, primary, secondary, articles, everything I read. And VLF gives me an opportunity to scan about 600 books in a year. So I'm really thankful to VLF for giving me this opportunity. Let me invite first Devika Sethi. She teaches history at the IIT. And I never knew this. Devika? So the introduction has been done by the AI. And do you see this future? AI doing the introductions? And that makes our job very easy. Then we have Anchal Malhotra, the oral historian. Then we'll have Swapna Little. She writes mostly on Delhi. Oh no, please, this side. Yeah, come. Yeah, come. And John. Please. John is a historian based in Australia, but writes primarily on our country. And for John, let me give you a disclaimer that we are going to speak in detail with John tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So don't miss my interaction with John. So as I said, that this is kind of a selfish panel discussion, and I'll draw everybody's attention to the subject that I'm talking about today. So, and by the way, this is not a debate. It's just a kind of a discussion, and then there are some opinions. We'll not dwell into any arguments, or don't want to know what we don't want to counter anybody's opinions and feelings or thoughts. So this is basically general kind of a discussion. Also in the audience, we have Amardeep Singh, also a historian, so to say, and mostly into the Sikh legacy in Pakistan. And we are going to have a fantastic documentary lined up tomorrow on Amardeep Singh's Indic Saints. Don't miss to have a chat with Amardeep tomorrow as well. So let me begin with asking this first question to all of you, maybe with Devika. And then anybody can just jump in. So Devika, my daughter asked me this. She's here. When I told her, why don't you take history as your subject for your undergrad? She said, what do I do when I take history? So either I teach again after completing my history, or I write a book.
Mm-hmm.
So
or she could be sitting here at the Vidarbha Literary Festival 10 years down the line.
I wish, but I mean, is that the only two ways? Why do young generation don't look at history as a career option? Why don't they kind of take up history seriously? Why does it sound very boring in the schools?
Yeah.
And this is not my daughter. I mean, it's just a kind of a metaphor I'm using, but in general.
Sure.
We have a professor of English here. He can also spread some light, but yeah, Devika.
Sure. So what happens with, first of all, a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. It's our pleasure to be here in Nagpur. Is this better? Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Thank you. Thanks. So what happens with any academic discipline is when you want to do a PhD, which is something you need to teach in universities and so on, you're already 30 by the time you finished your doctorate and you haven't earned a penny to your name. And if you're very lucky, you've got a scholarship which has subsidized your own work. Now, what happens with other careers? Let's say a BTech student. So I was 30 by the time I finished PhD. I've been teaching for 11 years now. But a BTech student who's 21 years old is going to earn more than I do at this age. So half my age and would probably earn double. So that's a very practical reason why people are hesitant to take up careers in the humanities. But I think it's very nice that you got this panel because the career graphs of all four of us are in some ways very similar. All of us would have started out with interest in history, maybe a master's, MPhil, PhD in history. Not necessarily in, that's not always necessary, but and all of us now, I'm a professional historian. I work, I've taught in Delhi University. I'm teaching at an IIT now. But you could also become a freelance author. That's one option. But you need historically trained people even in careers like diplomacy. I was in Mr. Tilak Devasher's session just before this, as were some of you.
Geopolitics.
On geopolitics. And you would have seen how historically informed that was. But also how that connects to India's own foreign policy. So that's one aspect. I think what we really need in this country is informed journalism, which is in-depth journalism, but still accessible to 2 million people who are subscribing to a particular newspaper. And I think for that also you need training in history, maybe even philosophy, maybe in political science. The only problem with having careers in the humanities, I was lucky, my parents were very supportive, but I know that's not the case with most people, is that the gestation period is very long. So you cannot expect that you will make a down payment on your house and a car and all this in your 20s. You might have to wait till your 30s. On the other side, I think it's a life that gives you a lot of satisfaction, personal satisfaction and so on. So it's really a trade-off between the two. But I'm sure the others have opinions on this.
Okay. Well, I don't have an MPhil or a PhD, but you're right. I had a very different career graph. I trained to be a traditional printmaker. The only thing I'm trained in is engraving on copper, lithography on limestone, bookmaking, paper making, handset typography. I can take apart a printing press and put it back together. Which, as I say it, not enough people in this room know what a printing press is. That was I have a bachelor's, I have a master's in fine art. I taught that for many years. And the reason why I arrived at history I think it's so late in life, I was 23, which many people may consider quite young. But I arrived at history because I didn't know anything about my own history. And there are two people, I think, two factors that I credit for this lack of knowledge. One is my own family that didn't tell me about personal history. That wasn't an active conversation at home until I started to ask. And the other was my school system.
Right.
The way in which history was taught to me when I was in school as a part of the NCRT was dull, it was dry, it was boring, it was not about people.
We'll come to that in the later part of the question.
Right, it was just about statistics, and everything was truncated into a few lines, which was just, utter disbelief when I actually started to study history and then later write it myself. One of the reasons why I chose to write the kind of history that I do, which is oral history, is because there is such a lack of people's stories when children study history in school that it seems as if history happened without people. And but this is how it is. No, but this is exactly how it is. And I know that we'll delve deeper into that, but that is my, not only mine, but people that do write oral history, that is their void to fill, to tell a more human side of history. Yeah.
You were talking about what do you do after history, and of course, I'm from when I was in college, a lot of my contemporaries actually went into civil services and things. That was a big thing at that time. You did a history, and that was a good subject to take if you were doing the civil services. Many went into the media. There are filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, feature filmmakers, all of that. People went into journalism as well. So, but beyond that, what I found, I was planning to be a teacher. And therefore I did the usual academic stuff. I did an MPhil, I did a PhD, and then I ended up not being a teacher. So that may be something that would interest you, because I went into a field which I think is now growing, and we should be looking at it, because I went into the heritage area. Now, interestingly, the heritage area, at least my experience of Delhi has shown me, seems to be dominated by people who are either from the tech area or art history or, conservation architects, a very amorphous lot who are talking about heritage. And I always feel a lack of historians there. And I think we should bring in historians there, because that really is a void that has to be filled. Heritage has to be talked about by historians. I think that's important. So, and I think, what I have been doing is I've been doing heritage walks. I've been popularizing the cause of heritage preservation. I've recently been asked to curate an exhibition, an art exhibition which was on historic art, artifact. They were historic photographs, etc. So I think there is this whole world out there which really needs trained historians, and I think. I think historians need to step forward, and by historians I mean people like you who are interested in study history, and then don't see what can I do when I study history, but you can do a lot of things. But you have to make your space in those areas as historians also. Because as you become a civil servant, yes, of course, your historical training helps you there, but then that's mostly the end of your historic engagement with history. But this way you can keep alive your interest in history also,
Well said, yes.
while pursuing a career.
Well said. Yes.
Thank you. My journey is again quite different than that of my fellow panelists. I'm from Australia, as you can probably tell, and Australia is a very long way away from everything. But what was a rite of passage when I finished school, which was back in the mid-70s, was to work for a year and travel overland through Asia for a year, which I did. And I visited, in those days you could do it. You could go through India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, etc. There weren't wars and all of that, Russian invasions. There were two things that helped me along my path. One was that the guidebook I carried, and this was, of course, days before internet, days before Lonely Planet guides and those sorts of things, was called Murray's Handbook for India, Pakistan, Burma, and I think maybe Ceylon in those days still. It was like the 25th edition of a handbook that had first come out in the you know it, do you? Yeah, I think 60s or something. But I think it was edited by Professor Rushbrook Williams, and everybody in it, like him, was a qualified Indologist. So there was sections on culture, religion, history, society, and so on. And it was like a gazetteer. There are still places in that handbook that you won't find in Lonely Planet. And so I travelled through India, and it was a really immersive experience. So when I got back to Australia, I decided I would study South Asian history, and I had as my professor A.L. Basham. Now, people of a certain age, I can see some smiles in the audience. Basham is deified still. I mean, he wrote The Wonder That Was India. My other lecturer at the time was S.A.A. Rizvi, who wrote the companion volume on Muslim history. And I was lucky enough to be one of Basham's last students. He died shortly after. I only did an honours with him. Then I started a career mostly in journalism with a very brief detour into diplomacy. But and I actually did do a PhD eventually, but that was only finished it about 6 years ago, and was I think I'm the only person with a PhD in Indian magic, because I did which was became one of, I think, my fourth book, which was on looking at India's magical traditions and how they
The Jadugars
and how they influenced, how Indian magic influenced the West and how Western magic influenced India. But I spent most of my career as a journalist, but I had this historical training, I guess, and that's really helped me when it's come to writing history, particularly of India, because I guess I take a very narrative style, and I really. For me, the most important thing is, like for Anchal, getting these oral histories. Not all my books have been based on oral histories, but my very first one, The Last Nizam, very much was, because I interviewed people who knew Mukram Jah. I interviewed him. Many of those people I spoke to in Hyderabad, those old Paiga Nawabs, are now dead, and their stories have gone with them. And that is what really drives me, and I feel like it's going to keep driving me, to keep coming back to India and to keep writing books, to capture these histories from people who were there and who saw them and who experienced them and can put them into context, and preserve them and bring them to a wider audience. India has given so much to me, and that's how I want to give something back to India.
Absolutely, and we want you to write more and more about our country. We'll talk in detail tomorrow on that. But coming to Devika, I mean, what Anchal was making a point about the NCRT books that she found them boring. But I think most of us during our school days found them boring. Mostly, we normally say this, it's up to the teacher to make it interesting. But I mean, it's too much of asking from teachers. They have got a framework that they cannot go beyond that. So you're currently teaching to the IIT Mandi, and history is your subject. So what is this challenge, and what the other teachers or the other students, for that matter, teachers will do their bit, but ultimately it's up to an individual how to generate that interest, to create that curiosity, and how to get out of that boring, mundane subject of history for them, for those who feel like that. Like Anchal confessed that she felt like this. So do you face this challenge in your teaching as well?
Yeah, thank you. So, textbooks, as we know, are very controversial, not just in India, but in Japan, Germany, US. In the US, for example, the big thing is, should you teach evolution or not? That's the kind of controversy that some states have. At the school level, as my young friends here would testify, textbooks are extremely important because they are pretty much, there's one textbook for every subject. It's authorized. Typically, it's NCRT or some such board. So, and you neither have the time nor the inclination nor the knowledge to go beyond the textbook to other books. College teaching, which I've done, is a little bit different because, especially in the humanities, very rarely is there one textbook. Very rarely.
Right.
Usually, it is a compilation of articles and chapters from various books. So, in that sense, the teacher can be more creative. That's one major difference. But one thing that is happening, and again, like all aspects of technology, it has its plus points and its negatives, is that now you no longer have to rely on textbooks, even in schools, because not only do you have, let's say, YouTube lectures, many of which can be very good, but you also have access to, let's say, social media and WhatsApp forwards and so on, which is at times risky, because what's happening there is that there is no peer review process. Nobody is testifying whether the information is accurate or not. So, in a sense, teaching has become more complex. But for example, I'll give you an example. Supposing I wanted to teach something about Ambedkar, or let's say I wanted to teach about the making of the Constitution. Today, I have through YouTube itself, not only do I have the transcripts of the Constituent Assembly debates, which are easily available to anybody online, I can actually have clippings from speeches made by people. I can show you Shyam Benegal's wonderful 10-episode serial called Samvidhan, which is available for free on YouTube, which is a historic reenactment. Just imagine how great that is for a teacher to be able to make a subject come alive through so much extra information.
Absolutely.
Other than just slides.
Correct.
And likewise for students. But as I said, the challenge is always that history is in some ways considered to be a very non-technical subject, which means that I cannot build an airplane, but anybody in this room can actually write, what they think is a history book on any aspect of the country's history. And that is sometimes also a problem. Because as I said, professional training in any discipline requires years and years and decades, either training or, as you mentioned, you've written 2 books or 3 books, and that's, field work, oral interviews, all of that is kind of time consuming. You cannot write a history book by, reading 6 Wikipedia articles and writing a book,
Right.
The next day. So teaching, I think, it really does depend on the teacher. But I think for schools, textbooks are still very, very crucial because they are the authorized versions of what students are learning. Not so much at the college level where the teacher has much more. That's the answer to your question.
So my question is actually, what should the students do?
At what level? At the school level or?
At the school level, because ultimately their purpose is to get secure good marks.
Right.
So that actually kills, I think, the fun. I mean, that's what with Anchal might have happened.
I should have never said anything.
No. I mean, I said that you said it's boring and NCRT
I
books
also, yes, but let's see.
because you chose a different career path and then they came back to writing history.
Yes, but let's just take the subject that I write about. Let's take partition. I have written 3 books on partition after a decade of research in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, the diaspora. There was a great large conversation about the curriculum on partition in the NCRT textbooks recently.
Right.
Partition has been removed from...
I know, yes.
Right, not entirely. There are some mentions of it. But to a large extent, partition has been removed because it is traumatic for the students.
I know.
Which means that I have teachers writing to me saying, can you come and speak to our students about your research and the people that you have interviewed to tell them about partition, because there is nothing in the textbook. When I was in school, it was very similar. It's not that there was nothing about partition in the textbook. Like I said, it was quite truncated. When I was in college, and maybe in the last 10 years, the textbooks actually had oral history in them.
Oh.
There was excerpts, I remember, from Urvashi Butalia and Ritu Menon and Anis Kidwai, their books in the textbooks.
Wow.
And this in turn was removed because post-pandemic it was very traumatic for students to learn about partition. This becomes very problematic. Also, the other problem is when you're writing on a subject on partition, I know we are sitting here in India, but the same subject is taught in Pakistan in a very different way. So there are also efforts by people across borders to try to teach the same history in both India and Pakistan. So what happens when your subject itself is contested? How do you tell students, how do you bring a nuanced understanding? Yes, I know students want to get marks and they want to do very good in their board exams and everything, but you're not actually learning anything. Like
How did you cope up with history as a school student?
Yeah, no, I did well because I just memorized things.
Okay.
But my teacher was not really interested in being there either. She was not really that interested. I hope it's different for other people, but it meant that because also I was born into a bookseller's family, I was privileged enough to read outside of my textbook, which I don't think a lot of people at that young age are inclined to do.
Agree.
So
Swapna, your education is absolutely wonderful. I mean, the education that you've taken, like you said that St. Stephen's and then JNU and then what you said? Jamia also. So you studied history all through?
Yes. And let me tell you one thing. As far as the history books are concerned, I actually didn't find the NCERT books too bad. I don't think they were, at least the ones that I remember reading. I didn't take a very active interest in my children's school studies. They handled it themselves. But I remember I quite liked my history books, and I had the most brilliant teacher in class 11 and 12.
Wow.
And that's where my decision to study history came from.
Oh.
Actually, I think the problem with a lot of this thing is not so much that the books have been bad, but our examination system is such that it concentrates on your ability to remember certain facts, right? And history happens to be particularly rich in facts, in the sense of you can pull out so many dates, you can pull out so many names, and then you can be tested on those. But actually, if you look at it, all of our subjects, okay, there is this complaint that my history is boring. Okay, which subject are you really enthusiastic about? Which one do you actually enjoy how your textbook is written, how entertaining it makes it? The problem with textbook is, look at a history textbook. It needs to give you, as a school student, it has to be aware of the fact that you may not read any other history beyond this. There are some people who will, their text 10th class book will be the last book they read on history. It's possible, right? And therefore, they want to give you a broad outline of Indian history. Now, you can't fault them that they have not talked about this, they have left out that. It becomes difficult. I mean, how much will they include and
Absolutely.
how much detail can they put in? They can't.
And there is a limitation of number of pages also.
Yes, so how much can they put in? So obviously, it won't be very... it won't be very entertaining in that sense. But, I think what we are expecting a lot from a history education. I don't know when that came about. I don't know how many people said my physics is not entertaining enough. It's not told in a story like
Very well said.
that
Very
I
well.
would like to hear it.
History is burdened.
It's not. History is burdened with that. And I just wonder.
I'll tell you why. In the next round, I'll tell you why.
Okay. So I'm just saying that I think we should cut history a little bit of slack. Just as there are maths, there are certain basic fundamental things that you need to learn. However, inconsequent. You don't understand, why am I learning this formula? Why? What particular interest?
absolutely.
What use is this going to be for me?
Perfect. I asked this question
You just have
a
to
lot of
learn
times.
it. You just have to learn it. I mean, right now, just learn it, and then you see when you.
Absolutely. So, whatever I learned in mathematics and science in 10th, I don't even remember. At least I remember my history, by the way.
There you go. There you go.
So, John, your experience would be different from, because you studied in Australia.
Yeah, I studied in
So,
Australia.
what kind of history you studied in Australia? How was it? Was it boring or what? I mean,
Oh,
how
it very much depended on the teacher, but it was pretty traditional. I'm just trying to think now. I mean, this is a very long time ago. How much India figured in my high school history curriculum, and I don't think it really figured at all. Maybe there was a little
Obviously,
bit about, but only in the context of the British Empire, and that's it. Which is very sad. I tell you, the other sad thing is that nowadays the India-Australia relationship is going gangbusters. I think our Prime Minister was in India twice last year. Narendra Modi was greeted by Anthony Albanese and called the boss, a la Bruce Springsteen when he arrived in Australia last year. Trade's booming. There's now nearly 10 lakh Indians, is that right? 1 million Indians living in Australia.
I have no idea.
10 lakh. That 10 lakh's a million, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, 1 million.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. But the number of universities teaching Indian studies in Australia has shrunk from I think 13 or 14, 20 years ago, just down to about 2 or 3 at the moment. So Indian literacy in Australia, in fact, Asian literacy is really, really, is going down the drain. I mean, our nearest important neighbour is Indonesia, and the number of students learning Bahasa Indonesian just keeps dropping. I studied Hindi, which I think is very important, even though we're all here speaking English. But I think really, if you want to understand and immerse yourself in a country like this, you really need to learn at least one of the main languages. It's my experience, of course, much different than everyone else's, but it very much depends on the teacher and how that history is taught.
So, teachers, it depends on teachers and also on the writings beyond the textbooks.
Yeah.
So people like you all who have written some interesting, exciting books, that encourages people to read more.
I think so. Yeah, I'm hoping so. And you can see too. I mean, I've been coming to India for obviously a very long time, and I must say that a lot of the history books that I used to consult when I was researching books like The Last Nizam on Hyderabad. That's now about 15 years ago. They were pretty dry academic tomes, which were written for basically other academics and didn't really make it much off the shelves of libraries. But that's changing a lot now. I mean, look at Ansha, look at Swapna. So I'm not familiar with
Devika,
I'm not familiar. I know Devika, but I'm not familiar with your books. But the narrative non-fiction, good historical narrative writing is now really coming to the fore in India. There's great writers out there doing really interesting works on a wide variety of historical subjects, and I think that can only be a good thing.
So coming to sorry, please, no, please.
Sorry. Can you hear me without this also?
No,
or-
that's
it's
actually
different?
that's for the recording. By
Oh,
the
that's
way.
for the recording. Okay. I just wanted to, but two very interesting points that both of you raised. I think I would agree with Achal because I had also worked on the 2005-2006 textbooks, and since she has appreciated them, I can now admit to that. Yes, as an editorial assistant, I had worked on the maps, but I had seen the faculty, the senior faculty at JNU who had been producing those textbooks, and I had seen to what extent, they had taught history for years and years, and I had also seen how meticulous they were. I just want to add one example because I'm now responding to what Swapna said about how students, in any case, there's a certain amount of information that you have to know, and students are not going to study only history, so you cannot make the textbook very heavy and bulky. But one way in which the 2005-6 textbooks had reconciled this is, just imagine if you teach, you have one paragraph on partition, but you include a story by, let's say, Sadat Hasan Manto or any other person that you think is a good writer as part of the textbook, and that would make history come alive. Or a poem, or today that would be possible by having a companion website. So you would have a basic textbook. That's I'm moving towards a solution, how to make textbooks interesting, because students also have varying abilities. Some want to study history in depth and some just want the basics.
True.
So if you have a companion website, that website has all these additional resources, literary resources, visual resources, which you have worked with, and so many others, so many new ways and sources, digital archives and so on. So you have a basic version, and then you have the plus version, and students access it as, of course, you have to examine them on the basic version. That would be one thing, yeah.
The other thing to add to that is, just now that you brought up partition, students were also supposed to do an oral history project themselves in grade 12, which means you're physically, even though you're like 16 years old, you're going out into the field and interviewing someone who has lived through partition. And I don't know whether that happens anymore or not, but that was very much mandated by the curriculum earlier.
So here I would like to take Amardeep, your view on this point that the partition has been removed from Indian textbooks, history textbooks. That has been removed. What is your view? I mean, should we talk about partition? Should we not talk about partition? Because you've traveled extensively in Pakistan. Your writings also about the Sikh heritage in Pakistan.
I'm an engineer. So I'm an engineer and an MBA, and I worked for 25 years in corporate life. Why did I get into this kind of work? Is because something was calling me deep inside about severance from your roots. Something was seeing the pain in my father's eye. The question is, anyone can come up with stories, right? So again, I say history is his story. Sorry for the ladies. I wish there was a her story also, but sorry, I didn't make that term. But history is his story. Now, goes back to the first question that you were asking, what should one do, right? Why should one? So I'm looping it from there. I have personally felt post my corporate life is, you can be a storyteller and do anything in life. Absolutely. Right? It really doesn't matter. History is going to be boxing you. You do anything in life. But if you're a storyteller, the world will be around you. Right? Now, yeah, so that's why you still have to go through everything. So don't box, but have the quest and the query for history. Right? And that's why I'm coming down to, right, to your question. So something was attracting me from roots, went down that direction, but then I'm challenged right now. I'll put the other side of the spectrum also, is because in today's world, you tell his story, your story is different than my story, right? Same version. Pakistan's got a very different story of the Sikh era. I've got a very different version of the Sikh era, right? And then when I tell my story, it irks someone, right? So the question then comes in, is just to close that, is that when you're telling this story, how do you manage, in today's world, there's so much of information coming in, how do you manage that? You can be a good storyteller. So I think at the end of the day, it's your roots. What connects with you?
If time permits, I'll come back to you about that letter that your father received. Quickly, we are completely running out of time. Oh, it's quickly gone. Huh? So my last question to all of you, starting from Devika again, that what was that moment when you decided to read, not write, but read history beyond the textbooks, go deeper? Like I told you, my moment when I thought of reading more into delve deep into that subject, or then it took me wherever I could go. So what was that moment? Quickly, I mean, just completely out of time.
So my father was very interested in the events of, My father had been very interested in the events of 1857. We were living in Kanpur at the time. And Kanpur, as you know, was a very important center. So Swapna will be interested to hear this. There's all sorts of places associated. And I think just visiting those places as a 13, 14-year-old, and then reading some accounts, although as a historian now I question those colonial accounts, but at that time I thought they were very powerful. I think that really spurred on the interest. And I've not researched 1857 at all in my career, but I think just visiting a monument can sometimes alert you to all these people who lived there hundreds, thousands of years ago. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Your moment, Anchal?
It's quite similar actually. I was in Old Fort in Delhi. Purana Killa, as we know, site of many civilizations. It was also one of the largest refugee camps
Yes,
after
it was,
partition
yes.
for Muslims going to Pakistan. When you go to Purana Killa today, and you can attest to this, there's not a single plaque that tells you how many millions lived there for several months. But of course, you see Margaret Bourke-White's amazing photographs of that time. And I read Anis Kidwai's Azadi Ki Chhao Mein. She was a social worker. She used to work in that camp and other camps, and she described in detail what was happening and what she describes monuments, who was living in what tomb. And I think using her text, I tried to recreate the landscape of that time of partition. So
Lovely.
that would probably
So just
be.
correct me if I'm wrong. Was the Humayun's tomb also used as a
Yes,
refugee camp?
absolutely.
Right.
And the Safdarjung tomb. Any
Safdarjung.
areas
Safdarjung
that
is
were
one of the
large
finest
enough.
monuments in Delhi.
Yes.
Please.
Just as a little postscript, the Archaeological Survey of India, when they were told that Humayun's tomb, they are going to have these people living and they're going to start now constructing toilets there and all that, they were like, oh my God, we've just made these gardens here. You're going to
You know
start
that
digging.
famous photograph of Margaret Bourke-White from those
Yeah,
two boys?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
in Purana Killa, and you can see exactly where they are, you know.
Yeah. So, for me, as I already said, it was when I was in class 11 and 12 that this whole world was kind of opened up. I'm not sure were there any specific things that I read at that time. No, I think for me that because I came in that late, it was just this thing that okay, college mein yahi padhna hai. So then of course you come to college, and by the way, college is such a eye opener for somebody studying history, as you realize that, you know, when you start studying college history, you say, oh my God, this is so much more wonderful than school history, because it's at a completely different level. It's so much more stimulating. And, you know, we had this we constantly went to the same college. So at different times. And so we had this, that was wonderful. So I have been like kind of mainstream in history for a long time.
Right.
It's not been a side discovery for me.
Absolutely.
So I always, for a long time, wanted to do just this.
Lovely. John, what was your moment?
Look, I think traveling to India, armed with my Murray's Handbook, but what I loved the most about India was its art and architecture, and in order to, if you go to Khajuraho, you obviously want to know which empire was responsible for this. If you go to Hampi, you need to know who was responsible for that. If you go to Mandu and all these sorts of places, so I started to, I've always preferred reading history to fiction, and most of the history that I've read has been on the subcontinent. And but I think in those early days, I was devouring books by Mildred Archer and George Michel, and these people who, and then that gives you that's your door, that's your entrance into the wider world of, you look at these monuments and you've got to understand the political system that enabled them to be built, the sort of society that sprung up there, how the layout of these ancient cities, and how the agricultural systems worked and all that. So it just there's no stopping it. You just keep going and going deeper and deeper into the
Absolutely.
history. Yeah.
And what is your profile picture on WhatsApp? Humayun's tomb?
It is Humayun's tomb, yes.
I was checking his WhatsApp. Anyway, so that is all my questions for this. And by the way, how often do you see top historians of the world, 4 of them, sitting in front of us? Don't miss an opportunity to interact with them. But before I open this for question answers for the house, I want Amardeep to quickly tell us that story of the letter that your father or you received. Who received that story? Quickly, and then we'll open this.
That'll be a short one. So my first book, Lost Heritage, The Sikh Legacy in Pakistan. The thing that I heard from my father, he was from Kashmir on the Pakistan side, Muzaffarabad. That's very close to the Uri side on India. So at the time of partition, my bhua lost her entire right child. There was a lot of this thing, and she got separated from her 2 young children, Arjun Singh and Hari Singh. They're no more. And she came to Gorakhpur. My father was in Gorakhpur, so the entire family came here, and they settled down. And then she would come and cry in front of my father. You know, mere do mein puttar reh gaye the. My both the sons were left, right, and they were probably 7 or 5 years old, and dad, they were all helpless. 2 years passed by, and one fine day a letter comes in Gorakhpur, written just as following: Sundar Singh, Gorakhpur. That's it, nothing else. Right? And apparently the two kids were picked up in the massacre at the Jhelum River, at the Dumel, Jhelum and Neelam River, in the massacres when the tribals came in. The cry was Hindu ka zar, Sikh ka sar, right? And both these kids then later on got separated, and they were being raised in a Christian missionary in Rawalpindi. And my Arjun Singh, 7 years, used to hear his mother, that's my bhua, talk about my father who had just gone to Gorakhpur about 5-6 months back. Ki papa bada dur chala gaya. He'd gone very far away. So, and he says, Gorakhpur chala gaya, bada dur, Sundar Singh, right? That's all he knew, Sundar Singh, Gorakhpur. And 2 years later, he managed to write a card. And that's how my quest, Lost Heritages, books. And then my 11 years of journey I've spent post-corporate life just doing these contents now. And the journey is increasing. I'm 57. I think I've got projects lined up till 62 years of age. I don't know what I'll do after that.
Wonderful. And is it safe to call you a historian today?
No.
Not yet?
I'm just telling stories.
Otherwise, I will stand myself corrected. We have 5 historians in the room then. Chanda, please open. This is open. Anyone can ask any question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is, our Indian history has so much of stories to tell and so many events have happened. So how it is decided that for which age group, what history is to be taught? Because like Achal said that, this is gruesome for the student, but that does not mean that we will never know that part of the history. So is there anything that is like, because you all have been associated, at which age group, which part of the history of India should be taught? Is there anything to that?
How do we decide?
How do we decide on that?
See, what happens is, as I said, most history textbooks are state-sponsored all over the world. You can have, books for young adults and so on, which are written by private individuals. And there's usually a group of professional historians that are given a contract. Now, there's no psychologist, there's no concept that, now those historians very often are also parents. So in that sense, and they've been students themselves. So the understanding is that they are well equipped to judge what kind of history has to be taught and what has to be taught. For instance, in Britain, there was a big scandal that, I don't know if you're aware of this, John, that they were not teaching the history of the British Empire to school children. School children in Britain till about a few years ago were not aware that Britain had an empire. Which is very odd. So again, and then there was an outcry and they may have made some changes. But I think one should leave it to the wisdom of professional historians. Can I take a minute and just... see, I just wanted to respond to something very interesting that you asked about storytelling and history writing. Because the question you asked is that if all of us have a version of the truth, all of us are storytellers, you may be a better storyteller than I, who gets to decide whose story is more valid? And that is where, these professional standards or source criticism, all of that comes in from there. So in your case, your source is your eyewitness testimony. So if you tell me something about a Gurudwara in Pakistan, you'll show me a photograph, it could be your reaction to it, but there has to be, if you tell me that Guru Nanak visited this Gurudwara, you might refer to myths and history and folk legends, and all that is also valid. But at some point, you might say that, okay, in this Sufi saint's biography, there is mention that Guru Nanak visited this area, in the Janam Sakhis, there is mention and so on. So I think history does have certain standards of establishing accuracy. Every story is not as valid as any other story. I just wanted to add to that.
I'll get the mic. 1, 2, and then 3.
I just want to ask, as a student, how do we actually study history then? If we have historians in front, this is the best
Read your
question.
textbooks first. Read your textbooks. I mean, you have to read your
We are
textbooks.
said to read textbooks.
Read books by historians. No, seriously. Don't read the WhatsApp forwards, right? And internet is a wonderful resource, but always don't think of the internet as an anonymous producer of knowledge. It's not. Look at if it's a website, who is producing this knowledge? If this is written by a historian, and again, look at their credentials as historians, right? So those kind of things. Be discriminating in looking at on the internet for information. I think that's something that is very, very important. It's not only history, generally. If you're looking for information on the internet, be careful to see who's putting it out. Do they have the credentials in that particular sphere? Do they have that domain knowledge, as they call it these days?
So when we ask the students to read history, when we ask them to read about Tanaji or Jodha Akbar or even Saragadi War, then they'll not read. But if you ask them to watch a movie, Kesari and all, so they'll go and watch it happily. So, but of course, there's a lot of masala in that movie, which some of the events may not be true or whatever, I don't know. So, what's your take on that? Like, how much do we rely on Bollywood movies or movies in general for history?
Well, I guess there the problem is that I wish we had better researched movies because, really they cannot be said to stand in for actual history, even on the very, very basic facts. I mean, Jodha Akbar, for instance, there is no Jodha Akbar. So I have no answer to that. But
also there was an interesting session on the Baba, if anyone attended. So he said that, very, very funny episodes. But yes, Prantik, let's have it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there is an elephant in the room that we are not addressing. Yeah, I feel there is a disconnect here between the digital migrants like you and me and the digital natives there. The question that you asked, history beyond textbooks, I don't know whether I say it right, but history beyond textbooks has to be hyperlinked, which means what? I'll take one more minute. Which means what? That if I'm doing Partition, if I'm reading Partition, then I need a hyperlink that goes to the Museum of Material History. I need, if I'm doing Partition, I'm going to need a hyperlink to the People's Linguistic Survey of India. I need a hyperlink which gives me clips to documentaries and archives. We are addressing a bunch of kids here who are looking at multimedia formats, right? And beyond textbooks is actually to give them what they want. It is precisely to make history not historical, but to turn it into a multimedia format.
Absolutely.
Just one more point. We're looking, it's a speculation, I'm no crystal ball gazer, but I think in the next 50 years, what's going to happen is that the entire cultural history has to be turned into a digitized form. So coming back to the question, what do I do when I study history? Well, you study digital archiving, for example. You get the media tools and the apps, the digital apps, which turn history into digital humanities, and the future is yours.
Super.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hello. So actually, somebody said right now that after 10th standard, a lot of people don't study history. So the same thing happened to me. And as far as I can remember, in my state syllabus, Gandhi ji ne humko azadi dilai. After that, nothing much was there in history. The princely states integration was there. So I'm talking maybe around 2000 or 98 ka history maybe. So I happened to read this book called India After Gandhi. I don't know how authentic it is considered by historians, by Ramchandra Guha. And I read everything and I was very impressed. I was like, okay, so our democratic values and everything, this is such a great thing. And I happened to have I happened to have a discussion with my friends. And one of them was very offended. He said, "Nahi, this is all wrong. He's a leftist and SI. And I became very confused. So my question is, does history change according to perspective? And how to interpret history? Like, should we have a balanced view? Like you read something
Multiple
from this
views,
author,
multiple views.
from a right-wing author, and
Got
then
it, got
balance
it.
with
We got it.
The difficult ones, huh? See, I just feel that there is absolutely no, first of all, I think we should go beyond labels because that's a very easy way of characterizing everybody, but fine, let's go with the labels also. It's always a welcome thing if you have multiple perspectives. It's also a wonderful thing if you have revisionist history, which means that, somebody said something about Akbar and somebody else is saying something else. All that is absolutely fine. Nobody wants, the moment I read on a book, the definitive history of, I don't pick up that book because clearly, that author is making a claim that nothing can be better. But as I just mentioned, you look at Ramchandra, as a professional historian, I have the greatest respect for him. You look at the footnotes of any of his books, not just the thickness of the entire book, you look at the notes and you will see the enormity of the research that he has done, the multiple sources. So that's always a good thing to do. So, forget about labels that are put on people. I think you mentioned about websites. So like for websites, I would say a .edu website is generally more reliable than a .com website. For a history book, I would suggest make up your own mind, but look at the footnotes. Don't even look at the qualifications of the person in terms of where they did their PhD from. There are many amateur historians who are doing wonderful work. And I think John also mentioned about this, explosion of wonderful non-fiction on India written by people who don't have PhDs. And that's a wonderful thing. But just look at the sources and see whether that person has done research or if that person is just rehashing a fifth story by reading 4 other books, which will be obvious from the notes. That's what I would suggest.
Right. So I think we're completely out of time. Thank you for a few joining us here in the evening. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, John will be here exclusively talking about his book, Dethroned. And the festival has just begun today. Tomorrow is absolutely fantastic power-packed sessions lined up for you. And this is not the end of the day one yet. We have a fantastic guy called Boria Majumdar just flying in. I think, has he reached? Yeah. Okay, so Boria is going to talk about his latest book, which was just released yesterday by the CM of Orissa. And don't miss out on that. Don't leave, without talking to Boria. Thank you, Chanda. Over to you.
Thank you so much.
That's in the hall, Banyan.
And thanks a lot to the audience for being in a session on history.
Thank you so much, dear authors, and thank you so much, Sachin sir, for moderating the session so well. May I request Shri Jitendra Nayak, our patron for VLF, to present our authors John Zubriski and Miss Swapna Little with small mementos, token of love from VLF. And may I request Mr. Anand Jaiswal, one of our patrons, to present Miss Devika Sethi and Miss Achal Malhotra with small token of love from VLF. These cards are made by Mandira, and these cards represent some of the most prominent monuments of Nagpur city. And once again, may I request Jitendra Nayak sir to present Sachin sir with a small goodie bag. This is going to be a memorable moment and picture because both these guys are the force and energy behind VLF. Please put your hands together for Sachin sir and Jitu sir. Thank you so much, everyone.